Good day, everyone. Welcome to Lesson 1.3, Errors in Chemical Analysis. Again, this is adapted from the PSHS Chemistry 4 Module Lesson 1.3. We'll start the lesson with the following targets. First, to classify errors that exist during chemical analysis. Second, to differentiate determinate and indeterminate errors. And third, to demonstrate important concepts in analytical chemistry such as significant figures, accuracy, and precision. From the previous modules, we have already learned about the tools used in analytical chemistry, how to operate the analytical balance and volumetric glasswares such as the pipette, burette, and volumetric flasks, and these involve the collection of data such as mass and volume. So how many digits do we retain when using the recorded mass or volume in calculations? That can be answered by significant figures. So first, significant figures are important when reporting measurements. The number of significant figures in a measurement correspond to all digits that are certain plus one uncertain digit. In this illustration, for example, we have something that looks like a graduated cylinder. So as we can see, each graduation corresponds to 1 ml, and the numbers go from highest to lowest from top to bottom. That means that this equipment or glassware is used to contain liquids. So we find that the lower meniscus falls in between the 82 ml and 83 ml mark. That means that we can report this reading to be 82 ml and add an uncertain digit. So in this case, we can report this as 82.7 ml, with 8 and 2 being the certain digits and 7 being the uncertain digit. Another example is this, which looks like a reading from a burette, because as we can see, the numbers are increasing from top to bottom, meaning that this glassware is used to dispense liquids. So looking at the lower meniscus, we can see that this glassware has already dispensed around 22.2 ml. Notice also that the smallest graduations correspond this time not to 1 ml, but to 0.1 ml. We can say, therefore, that this is a more specific or accurate measuring tool. So if we can report the measurement to be 22.2 ml and add an uncertain digit, which in this case I'd say is 0, because it looks like the lower meniscus falls exactly at the 22.2 ml mark. So if we add an uncertain digit, that would be a 0. So the final reading is 22.20. And then finally, this example, which looks like a reading either from a burette or a pipette. Again, it's used to dispense a liquid because the graduations come from lowest to highest from top to bottom. So we see the lower meniscus to fall at the 2.5 ml mark, adding an uncertain digit, which we estimate to be just 0. So the final reading is 2.50 ml. Next, how about significant figures in reported numbers or measurements? So we have the following rules. First, all initial zeros are not significant. For example, in this number, the 4 zeros before 3, 2, 1 are not significant. So this reading only has 3 significant figures. All zeros at the end of a number and follow a decimal point are significant. In this case, 3, 2, 1, and the 2 zeros that follow are all significant, giving 5 significant figures. Remember that this makes sense because the last digit would be important as it is the uncertain digit, and also the digits that precede that are all measured digits and certain. Number 3, non-zero digits are significant. That's self-explanatory. Number 4, all zeros in between non-zero digits are significant. So in this case, we have 10 significant figures corresponding to 3, 2, 1, 4, 0, 0, 0, 5, 6, 0. Next, how about significant figures in calculations? We have the following rules. For addition and subtraction, the result shall have the same number of decimal places as the given measurement with the least number of decimal places. For example, if we add these three numbers, notice that 4.2 has the least number of decimal places, which is 1. Therefore, in the sum, we only use 1 decimal place and drop all the rest and round off as needed. For multiplication and division, the answer should bear the same number of significant figures as the given measurement with the least number of significant figures. For example, 253 times 3.45 over 72 gives the following result. However, 72 only has 2 significant figures, which is the least among all of the other measurements there. So the final answer should retain 2 significant figures. And we report the final answer to be 12. In this case, it's just applicable that we drop the extra digits, but if we need to round up, then we will have to, for as long as we retain only 2 significant figures in the final answer. For logarithms and anti-logarithms, the number of significant figures in the original number will be the number of decimal places in the logarithm of that number. For example, if the original number is 3.425 times 10 to the negative 5, and we would like to take the logarithm of that, then the 4 significant digits in the original number translates to 4 decimal places in the resulting logarithm. Similarly, for an anti-logarithmic process, the number of decimal places in the original number will be the number of significant figures to be reported in the anti-logarithm of that number. So if we start with 22.54, the significant digits there are only 5 and 4. Therefore, our final answer is reported in 2 significant figures, 3.5 times 10 raised to the 22nd. For chemical calculations, we follow the same set of rules for significant figures in calculations, only that the rounding off is done in the final step only. For example, a 3.482 gram sample of a solid mixture containing benzoic acid with a molar mass of 122.123 grams per mole was dissolved and titrated with base to a phenolphthalein endpoint. The acid consumed 41.36 milliliters of 0.2328 molar NaOH, or sodium hydroxide. Calculate the percent benzoic acid in the sample. So here's the solution from the module, and there's the final answer. So if you can compute the final answer using this straightforward manner, but you may also use different approaches. For example, if we're asked to calculate the percent benzoic acid in the sample, then you know that the formula or the definition of percentage is the mass or amount of the component, in this case benzoic acid, over the mass of the sample times 100%. So The problem already gave us the mass of the sample, but we do not have the mass of benzoic acid. But we can compute for that using the relationship, the mathematical relationship coming from the titration process, which is the number of moles of acid equals the number of moles of base. In this case, the number of moles of benzoic acid can be computed by dividing the mass of benzoic acid over the molar mass of benzoic acid, and the number of moles of NaOH simply equals the molar concentration of NaOH times the volume of NaOH. So we can rearrange this equation to solve for the mass of benzoic acid, and we can substitute the values given by the problem to the molar concentration of NaOH here, and then the volume of sodium hydroxide. So the problem has given it in milliliters. We can immediately convert it into liters so that it seamlessly fits in our equation. And then the molar mass of benzoic acid. Then we get this intermediate result, which we can substitute into the percentage formula to get the percent benzoic acid. And then, because we will need to round off to 4 significant figures, we drop all the extra digits and report 33.77%. So that is the final answer for this problem, reported in 4 significant figures. Moving on, we have accuracy and precision. Starting off with accuracy, is the closeness of a given measurement to the true value. So in illustration, that would be like this arrow hitting its mark or hitting the bull's eye. For example, during a proficiency test using a reference sample containing a 24.54 parts per million lead solution, a chemist found that the concentration of lead in the sample is 24.46 parts per million. We can say that the analysis is accurate since the result is close to the true concentration of lead in the reference sample. So in this case, by inspection, we can see that the values are similar or very close to each other, so we say that it's accurate. However, it's a subjective opinion. Subjective na opinion pa. Because we're not using any measure. So how do we know, or what measures of accuracy do we have? That would be 2. First is the absolute error, and next is the relative error. So the absolute error provides an idea whether the measured value is higher or lower compared to the true value. And it's given by this formula. It's simply the difference between the measurement and the true value. So in our previous example, for the lead determination analysis, the absolute error would be negative 0.28. Notice that there is no unit for absolute error. And notice that it may also take a positive or a negative value. In this case, the negative absolute error tells us that the calculated result is lower than the true value. On the other hand, a positive absolute error indicates that the calculated result is higher than the true value. Also, I'd like to emphasize that absolute error in this case does not mean absolute value. Okay, the name simply mentions the word absolute, but there is no absolute value function anywhere in the formula. Next, the relative error is simply the absolute error divided by the true value and can be expressed in percent, parts per thousand, or parts per million. And this is the formula. And again, it's just the difference over the true value, or the absolute error over the true value. and you will not see any absolute value symbol there. Therefore, the result may either be positive or negative. Going back to our example, for the lead determination analysis, if the absolute error is negative, then the relative error is also negative. Also notice that this formula gives a result with no unit. Unless you multiply this ratio with 100%, then you'll get an answer in percentage. If you multiply it by 1,000 or 1,000,000, then you'll get a unit which is in PPT or in ppm. But as far as this equation is concerned, it only gives a fraction unless it is multiplied by any power of 10. So the measures of precision, okay, so that's it for accuracy. Next, we move on to precision. It is the closeness of replicate measurements with each other. It is also referred to as reproducibility. So previously, we have seen an arrow hitting the bullseye of the target. In this case, notice that we are not, precision is mostly concerned with the closeness of individual measurements hitting the target, hitting a value that is close to each other rather than just the target. So, for example, the chemists recorded the following concentrations of lead. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different values, and they're all at around 24. So since they're close to each other, we say that the data are precise. But then again, this is just subjective inference based on visual inspection. So precision can be expressed in different ways, such as standard deviation, variance, and coefficient of variation. And that will be discussed in more detail in the next modules, because the discussion is going to be more extensive. So there, we will end there for precision. We will not go deeper into these for this module. So let me just emphasize that in analytical chemistry, we need to both be accurate and precise. So this can be done by careful performance of the procedure to avoid errors in conducting chemical analysis. So here's a summary of the concepts of accuracy and precision. You may have seen this from integrated science. So the ideal situation is this. We would like our data to be of high accuracy, and they also should be sufficiently close to each other so that they have high precision. In some cases, data could be of low accuracy but with high precision. This happens when you are consistently doing something wrong in your analysis. Next is a case where we have high accuracy. That's when the mean of all your data hits the target, but notice that the data is of low precision. So this is the effect of random errors, which we will discuss in a while. And then finally, this data set, of course, is undesirable. It's of low accuracy and low precision. So we move on to the types of errors in experimental data. There are 3. We start off with random or indeterminate error, which affects the precision of data sets, just like this illustration, just like the illustration I showed you earlier. So random error is inevitable in measurements and are difficult to identify. So we cannot really attribute it to a single factor. It causes scattering of data around the mean value. So no matter how much we try to fix everything in an analysis, there will always be random error. An example would be variations in reading the volume of a liquid sample. This is assuming that you have already tried to control everything that you can to make your readings and measurements as accurate as possible. There are also temperature fluctuations which affect the mass of solids being weighed or the volumes of liquids being measured. So when we speak of temperature fluctuations, this does not mean that, for example, when you are weighing something that is very too warm to be put in a balance. Okay, in that case, that could be a different type of error. But what we mean here by temperature fluctuations is just the normal fluctuation of temperature in a room or in ambient areas when you're doing the experiment. It's something that you really cannot control. Okay. Next, we move on to systematic or determinate errors. So from the word determinate, it means that the analyst can point out these types of errors, and these affect the accuracy of data sets. So this is when, as I said, you are doing something consistently high to make your readings consistently high or consistently low. Therefore, your data would be precise because you're carrying out each trial consistently. However, something is being done consistently wrong. That is why the mean of the data does not hit the target. So there are different classifications. We have instrumental errors, or errors caused by poor instrument condition and calibration. Method errors, which are caused by poor outcomes caused by substandard conditions of chemicals and reactions. And personal errors, which are caused by personal limitations of the analyst, such as failing to follow procedures properly, among others. So an example would be parallax error. That is when a person reads the lower meniscus or reports a reading consistently high or consistently low when the eye level relative to the meniscus is high or low. Ideally, you would have to read the measurement at eye level. Okay, so let's say if a person is too short or too tall, or if he or she did not move the meniscus or the reading to his or her eye level, therefore you would have this parallax error, and that is considered a personal error caused by your personal limitations, but would be difficult for you to change. So these can be detected by analysis of reference standards. Reference standards are chemicals of known concentration and purity. For example, pH buffer solutions. So those are standards which has a predetermined value or a value that has been measured by a reputable chemical laboratory. Therefore, you can check whether you're getting the same value as they have been. Next is analysis of blank samples. So this illustration shows a solution at different pH levels. So this might have been mixed with a chemical indicator. That is why the different pH levels have different colors. But look at this blank solution. The blank solution is supposed to contain the solvent plus all other reagents that has been used to treat the sample. So the blank should contain everything except the sample in the solution. Except the sample. So you would like to check that your blank should have no reading, you can like set the reading to 0, or you can measure the reading from the blank and subtract it from the reading from your samples. And then next is variation of sample size to check for constant or proportional errors. So constant errors are errors which do not change in magnitude as sample size increases. On the other hand, proportional errors are errors that increase in magnitude as the sample size also increases. So if you would like to vary sample size, for example, in titration, instead of consistently using 10 ml of analyte for titration, you can have like one or a few more readings with, let's say, 25 ml or 50 ml, and then titrate that sample to see if you'd be computing the same result for the concentration of the analyte, just to check if systematic error is present. And finally, third-party analysis, that's simply allowing other chemists to analyze your sample and checking if you're getting the same results. Okay, third on the major types of errors in experimental data is gross error. So again, we have determinate and indeterminate error, or systematic and random errors. And third, we have this gross error. It causes large errors leading to outlier data. So these are mostly errors by external factors or caused by the experimenter himself or herself, like when the contents of a mixture is spilled, or when weighing something and it has spilled. Or let's say if an insect gets into your sample container. So that ends the contents of our module 1.3. To continue with the navigate part of the module, here's a formative assessment from Skoog. First, a method of analysis yields masses of gold that are low by 0.4 milligrams. Calculate the percent relative error caused by this result if the mass of gold in the sample is 500 milligrams and B 150 milligrams. So this problem is very straightforward. Simply use the definition for the relative error, plug in the values, then you get the answer. Make sure to report the answers in the correct number of significant figures. And in that case, I would like to emphasize that for 500 milligrams, you can consider this as having 3 significant figures, while for the 150 milligrams, also consider this as having 3 significant figures. Because when we weigh something and find it to be 500 milligrams, we usually use a balance which is able to measure up to the last digit, up to 1 milligram. Okay, we usually do not use like a market kilogram weighing scale to measure something in milligrams, right? So in this case, probably the decimal point or the bar on top of the zeros have been omitted, but we will have to consider these measurements as having 3 significant figures. Number 2, calculate the molar concentration of nitric acid in a solution that has a specific gravity of 1.42 and 70.5% nitric acid. Express your answers to the correct number of significant figures. So the purpose of this problem is simply to have you practice reporting the correct number of significant figures. Nevertheless, at your level, you should have no trouble doing this, but to give you a refresher of what you are supposed to do for this problem. So this is actually a problem involving conversion of concentrations from percent by weight to molarity. So you can start with 70.5% nitric acid. That means, or you can express that quantity as 70.5 grams nitric acid all over 100 grams solution. Okay, so after expressing this concentration in that manner, you can convert the numerator part, 70.5 grams of nitric acid, into moles of nitric acid. And you can also convert the 100 grams solution from the denominator into liters of solution. How do we do that? By using the density. In this case, we're given specific gravity, but we know that specific gravity is simply the ratio of the density of a substance to the density of water, which is just 1. Therefore, we can immediately say that the density of this solution is 1.42 grams per ml. So use that to convert grams of solution into liters of solution, then you will be able to get molarity. Finally, for the not part, which is an assignment, still you'd have to include this in the same worksheet that was uploaded. So describe at least 3 systematic errors that might occur while weighing a solid on an analytical balance. Okay, so that ends Module 1.3. I hope that this has answered your questions and has helped you digest the module. So until the next video, bye class.